Hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Perfect.
We are.
All right, man. Well, let's skip the chit chat and just get right into it. I'm sure
Oh,
we'll
shit.
we'll get into everything as we go along. But
They don't
uh,
call it rapid fire for nothing, I guess.
now, man, rapid fire right into it.
All right.
Um, I feel like I should say it's an honor to speak with you. I know that's weird, but like you've become this kind of hero in the Bitcoin community. And I was thinking, I was just out for a run, and I was thinking to myself, like, it's gonna be funny. Actually, the real thought was like, if the whole Citadel thing does, transpire, if we end up kind of fracturing into our respective groups of like-minded, like financially sovereign factions, there might be like statues to BSG in the future. That moment when it entered the mainstream, when the kind of middle finger to the man. What does it feel like?
I doubt it, personally. Uh, but no, it wasn't really the politically motivated uh, photobomb that I think people thought it was. It was really just me being a monetary dork and wanting a screenshot of me doing something funny on the Federal Reserve testimony. So it definitely snowballed beyond where I ever thought it would go.
Yeah, and so I know that the story's been told, quite a bit on a few different podcasts, but for the select people that don't know who you are, can you just give like the real Cole's Notes version of how you became quote unquote famous?
Sure. So twice a year, the Federal Reserve gives its testimony to Congress about the state of markets and their monetary policy. And having previously worked for a global macro hedge fund, uh, I was working, a summer after in Washington D.C., and I had previously followed all the testimony of central bankers, and I mean the it's really just markets people that watch that type of stuff. Ordinary people, they catch just one headline maybe if they read the Wall Street Journal or something like that, but it's really just coded economic language for economic actors. And so it's very dry and dense, and every central bank has their central bankers talking like around the clock basically. So it was basically my small act of rebellion against a tedious job that I used to have to do. But I would say a job that I had when my worldview on central banking was completely being challenged. So central banks are very careful in those hearings. What they say. There's an entire you know category of doublespeak, or as it was first coined, greenspeak after Alan Greenspan. They try to say what they're going to do with monetary policy without actually, uh, surprising anyone, and basically negotiating the market's expectations for, say, where interest rates will move, or uh, where asset purchases or sales will go in the future. So, you know, you realize through these hearings, you realize very quickly the sort of absurd conceit of, you know, call it modern financial markets. And so Bitcoin really, the reason why I was into Bitcoin after doing that is because, you realize how absurd it is. And sort of, I was pushed into Bitcoin by that, not pulled by any, certainly no technological insight or intuition on my end.
Right. And so what was, so for people that don't know what you did, why don't you
Oh yeah.
fill them in?
So I had I had a notepad with me because I was taking notes on this hearing, and it's broadcast because it concerns the markets. It's broadcast on C-SPAN, Bloomberg, CNBC, that sort of thing. And so I decided to photobomb Janet Yellen with a sign that said, "Buy Bitcoin," when she was being questioned about the auditability of the Federal Reserve. So it was a spur of the moment thing, but I'm glad that Bitcoiners got a kick out of it, and that I'm truly grateful that it's enabled me to meet a lot of people who are in Bitcoin, and indeed many of my heroes.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, man, because am I correct in presuming that I heard you say that you did it just so that you could have like a memento, you'd screen capture it later and you'd have a picture for, just for your own personal memories. And it turned into this big meme, and it's another one of those things that just fits so perfectly into how Bitcoin grows and how it becomes, how it generates awareness and enters into people's awareness. But for you, is it fair to say it changed the course of your life? I mean, all this attention, and then it enabled you to do probably what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I was gunning for the Bitcoin space before that. I was intending to apply, or I was in the process of applying to several cryptocurrency companies, like Bitcoin companies and funds. And so I was on the trajectory, but butterfly effect. It probably helped my name recognition with those people.
Who can say no to Bitcoin sign guy? I mean,
yeah, it's a funny introduction to receive. Yeah, it works. But sorry, the first part of your question was
well, it was just how much has it changed? This silly thing that you wanted to do for your own memories. It's kind of probably changed the course of your life.
Right. I would say that's probably true. And then I sort of realized it after I had some ex post like rationalization about why it happened or why it like worked. And so basically that memes are, a new type of cultural language that are transacted in digital spaces. And so it was sort of geared correctly to be popular, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
It was just a single image or a GIF. It wasn't like it before that event, before that day. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people that had already been saying brilliant things about Bitcoin online, making brilliant critiques of the Federal Reserve. But it's really an image that gains the most traction in our sort of world that's really awash in images.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's such a fascinating phenomenon that, as you said, there could be, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours and words written in books about Bitcoin and why it's important and why you should understand it and the complexity of it all. And a 2-3 second video or even just the photo of you holding up a scribbled "Buy Bitcoin" sign behind the head of the chair of the Federal Reserve, and that's the thing that permeates and spreads through culture. I mean, it's amazing. And I heard, did you study? You majored in arts, but I think your thesis or something was in memes of some kind.
Yeah. So thank you for I don't know, listening to untold amounts of podcast hours of me rambling to find that out. Yes. So like I said, it was my intuition. Most concretely, I did one of my thesis projects for my study of art in school was formalizing memes as a cultural language that exists and is most effective in digital spaces. So what I did was I cleared out a gallery in my school's art building, and I printed out large format memes, like 5 foot, like 3 foot by 5 foot memes, put them into fancy looking frames, put up wall text, had pamphlets, that type of thing. Basically, to try to get people to acknowledge them as, I guess, a serious, if not artistic, then at least cultural language, and certainly, undeniable artifacts in the same way that, uh, a painting of the Impressionist, period, is an artifact of, that artistic culture.
And I mean, being that that's the case, and not that I'm calling you out, but it's hard to conceive that you couldn't imagine that moment where you held up the sign was going to turn into. I mean, you fucking studied it. How could you not think it was going to?
I mean, I guess that's just like that academic blindness. I guess that's why Bitcoin isn't developed in universities.
And the other funny thing I thought about, or in watching the video again just yesterday, did you know the guy that was next to you? Because you kind of like give him a few awkward glances before you put up the sign, and he looks at you like, "What, bro?" And then you kind of like push him out of the way to hold up the sign.
Yeah,
I actually thought he was Bitcoin sign guy when I first.
Oh, really?
Well, because the sign is kind of almost more in front of him. If you look at it like for 2 seconds, you see that it's you're staring at the camera with a big smile, but for a second I thought it was him.
Yeah, he was my coworker. He was my coworker at the time, and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm making this sign. What do you think?" And he's like, "Oh boy, it's like you might regret that." And I thought, like, nah, nothing will come of this. So yeah, he's still, I believe, working in the realm of monetary economics. He basically had the same job that I did at the time, which was just basic policy analysis for a relatively, free market and monetary reformist branch of a think tank in Washington, D.C.
So you hold up the sign, it gets, sent throughout the world. You get ejected from the hearing 30 minutes, 45 minutes later. Did you think you were in real trouble, or did you just think, oh, fuck, I'm getting kicked out of here?
Yeah. My phone was dead at the time, so I didn't realize that it was on Twitter, basically, until I got kicked out and then got back to the office, and all of my coworkers were talking about it, and ultimately got summoned to the big boss, and they don't, they, as a think tank, they make their bread and butter, having, being on good terms with lawmakers and policymakers, essentially. So it doesn't carry their cause to have one of their employees disrupt a hearing and divert the attention of onlookers on TV and Twitter, to Bitcoin when they're trying to have I don't know, a more institutional conversation.
So did you get fired or what?
In so many words.
Right, and
but it was good. The Bitcoin community, welcomed me pretty much immediately with open arms. I found another place to work for the rest of the summer, and then ultimately at the end of the summer was still able to transition to a cryptocurrency fund.
Right, and you sold 21 unique copies of the sign, right?
Oh yeah, I guess that's just the art major coming back out in me. So yeah, I thought, hey, it's an image that is sort of like, I guess now it's just been around so much that it's I mean, it would sound like a brag to call it like the Campbell's chicken or the Campbell's tomato soup, like sort of Warhol-esque. of crypto, but it's like you know what I mean? It's a flat image that's very basic that you know is a signifier for, I don't know, something else.
Sure, man.
So
Sure.
I I guess I put it in those artistic terms, and I just thought, it would be a fun project to do. Because a bunch of people at the time also asked me if I would make them a sign, sell them a sign, or sell them the sign. Had a number of offers for the actual sign, and
Where's the original?
it's safely tucked away, I assure you. Yeah. I mean, my plan is actually, if there's ever a true crisis in Bitcoin, not that it would sell for that much, but that I would auction it off for someone if there was truly a moment of distress.
I don't know.
So
I think
we'll keep it in my back pocket.
yeah, I think that's probably a good insurance policy, man. I mean, if things continue to go the way I'm sure we both suspect they will, notwithstanding, ups and downs along the journey, but in 20, 30 years, that's going to be a piece of, an important piece of cultural history. And it's probably, I mean, the 21 copies are probably going to have a nice price tag on them, but the original, man, you keep that puppy.
Boy, oh boy. Yeah. Well, I hope we can get there. I, uh, I, I, well, if on one hand, if Bitcoin succeeds, maybe it will be talked about. But if Bitcoin doesn't succeed, I don't even think I would be, considered I don't even think that I would be remembered as like the fool of Bitcoin. I just don't think Bitcoin would be remembered at all. Like, it would be, Bitcoin would be shoved down the memory hole very hard by, if the neoliberal power could, recapitalize on, I don't know, some type of Fed coin.
How do you see the future playing out in Bitcoin?
Uh, that's a broad question.
Sure.
The future of Bitcoin.
Or basically, what I mean is, based on what you just said, like, do you think we're going towards a future where it's going to succeed and actually continue to be something in the world, or not?
Well, I think Bitcoin has a strong chance to succeed. I wouldn't accept it as given, though. Right. I would say, there are certain criteria that need to be met for Bitcoin to, eventually live on. So perhaps the finest technical definition that I ever heard put on it was, by Eric Voskuil, talking about how the black market, the fees that the black market generate need to exceed the foregone tax revenue by the government, because it's a very basic cost equation for a government in the future. It's like, okay, well, we gain this many $1 billion of tax revenue every year. Bitcoin would bring that number down by this amount. Therefore, our the budget that we could spend on destroying Bitcoin is this. And so if that on the other hand, like the fees are the counterbalance to that. It's like, is the money that is the fees generated to miners, that accrue to miners, like enough to keep them mining honestly?
Yeah.
Does it exceed the government's budget to shut it down? So that's a big question. So what does that rest on? What are people's desire to use Bitcoin? What is would there be a knowledge gap that would preclude us from getting there? I don't know, but I do think that we will exit the honeymoon phase eventually, and that question will be brought to the fore. Mm-hmm. Maybe it will be obvious that one side will win once we get to that point, but I don't know. I still think we're in a state of unknowing about that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I listened to Eric on with Marty and Matt, and it was a bit hard to keep up with. But as a result, I asked Eric if he wanted to come on here, and so I'm going to speak to him next week, and I'm going to have to prep hard for that one because smart dude with who goes fast, and I want to make sure that I can investigate some of the things he's saying and maybe make it a bit more clear in my mind. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it play out. It does feel like we've been in this 10-year honeymoon period, and I guess it's hard to tell when that period is going to end. But I mean, I guess with every passing day we get closer to it. But it does seem like with the attention that it's received this year, from the Fed chair and from the president and people like that, like feels like it might be entering into a phase where it's less fun and games and a bit more serious, but who can tell?
Right.
So what are you working on these days? Like, what does...
Sure. Let's see. I have a few projects. I guess not to dox myself too hard,
Sure.
but one is a very vanilla payments processor, because Bitcoin, it will be the future of payments, but payments still suck for a lot of important political groups right now. So to the extent that they can't use PayPal, they can't use Visa and MasterCard in many cases. So to the extent that we can keep the lights on for them while they still have customers who exclusively deal in fiat, that's important. And then I have I guess several engagements other than that. Primarily there's a project in San Francisco that I'm now working with that is looking to redesign, or rather design anew from the bottom up, an alternative to Unix and essentially Linux. The modern operating systems that we all use, essentially to harmonize their code base such that they would be more effective computers for operating personal servers, and thus be able to better host personal social media data, or data in general, operated on peer-to-peer applications. So it would be great if we could all have peer-to-peer Twitter, right, where Twitter doesn't store your tweets, but that your tweets are served by your own machine.
Yeah.
Right. That would give you the ability to, strictly limit the ways in which the things that you write are used, who can track it, that type of thing, and moreover, especially in the era of big data, you won't become a part of the social graph for these social companies. In fact, it wouldn't even be possible to serve you advertisements. Like, essentially, the demonetization of your data is I guess one possibility.
And are you publicly associated with this project? Because I saw some
yeah
some giveaway photos.
So there will be, I guess, more formal announcements coming in the future. So if your listeners are sharp, they would probably be able to figure it out. But there will be, I guess, more formalized announcements in the future about about Bitcoin's relationship to this operating system.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll leave it at that. But yeah, essentially, Bitcoin is a sound money. The project that I'm working with is building a sound computer. So to the extent that you need a digital system to transact a digital money, it would be good if that were, perhaps more performant than what we're currently using. Because indeed, the failures of our current hardware and software, precipitated the situation of the cloud web.
Yeah.
And I guess that would be a controversial view of mine, is like, and that perhaps motivates my involvement with this project, which is if we continue using Bitcoin purely on the cloud web, if we don't actually migrate to a self-hosted web, then the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I think we'll wind up with the same exact result. If 95% of Bitcoins, or even 50% of Bitcoins are stored on the Coinbases or Cash Apps of the world, as grateful as I am to those companies, they are a source of fragility for Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. With one motion, the government could say, okay, Coinbase, your customers can no longer withdraw in Bitcoin, and that's a rule that a government agency could make practically on a whim. It would be trivial to pass a rule like that, and so I think that unless we're operating Bitcoin on our own hardware, the project will have a cloud looming over its head.
Yeah, and I've heard you maybe refer to this scenario and the solution that you're contributing to as kind of a cyber jihad, where every element of this thing has to be considered and made more resilient or anti-fragile or bulletproof. Or is that what you were referring to when you dropped that term?
I guess by cyber jihad I meant more that it must be it's a totalizing mission that we need to throw ourselves into.
Right.
There's a great book on the conquest. It's called The Conquest of New Spain. And when Hernan Cortez and his men came from Spain and landed in Mexico, I don't think there were more than, there definitely wasn't 1,000 of them. I think it was like 200 versus something like 200,000 Aztecs. Yeah. I probably have the numbers off by an order of magnitude there. But basically, very few Spanish versus a whole lot of Aztecs. And in the book, that one of his captains wrote, it's the story of how they went about the mission of entering into this world of impossible hostility. And what they did was Cortez demanded that they burn the boats. And so there was no way back, that they would either succeed or face destruction. So, not to be dramatic or anything, I mean, but it seems like the project of digital liberty is at this moment where it must convert on it, because it's been delayed for a very long time now. We've had those sort of tone deaf internet manifestos. It's like, oh, we're going to a world of sovereignty online. There's going to be no more state, and 25 years later, it's all still here, and even more powerful. So there must be a certain zeal that Bitcoiners bring with them to their work on the Bitcoin project, and so that's what I mean by cyber jihad.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, to further that example of Cortez and the Aztecs, and I don't know what the specific example is, but when you were saying that, what came to mind is another thing that brought the Aztecs down in that scenario was the dominant narrative, what they believe, basically, the predominant narrative in that, because I think part of the way that Cortez was able to take advantage of them was that they believed that a bearded, like, white man was going to come and was this all-powerful being, right? I think that was part of the story, and so
That's what the Aztecs thought.
yeah, and so that caused them to perceive, basically not perceive the reality of the situation correctly. So they're kind of the dominant narrative was part of their ultimate downfall. And I don't know what the exact corollary is, but I'm hoping that's the case with the legacy system versus what we as Bitcoiners are trying to do.
Well, I guess you would hope that a central bank would get spooked into joining Bitcoin and going whole hog, incorporating it into their reserves,
right?
Or otherwise courting Bitcoin business in their country through a permissive regulatory environment.
Yeah.
Rather than having an adverse reaction and trying to kill it. So
yeah.
that would be my sort of roundabout advantage that Bitcoin has. That there's a lot of central banks in the world, and a lot of people that aren't on board with the dollar-based hegemony, monetary hegemony. In fact, indeed, most aren't, if not all, except the U.S. aren't. So, like Mark Carney the other day in Jackson Hole at the monetary conference, was saying essentially that, which is the dollar-based hegemony is not in the interest of the rest of the world. That projects like Libra, Libra, are you kidding me? Should be taken seriously in that regard. That they offer a perhaps an alternative to using the dollar as some final settlement currency.
Yeah. Another potential is that perhaps the greed of the actors in the legacy system, maybe not so much from a government perspective, but just the big dominant players in the commercial, legacy system. By the time they realize, the hole that their greed has dug for themselves, maybe it'll be too late. That's kind of another way I hope Bitcoin is being kind of sly and roundabout in its way of getting it. They don't realize that they're supporting the virus before it's too late. Maybe that's
right.
That's a hope. Yeah, but it is interesting. You mentioned Carney.
Sorry, I think I'm losing you. How's our connection? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah. So to your comment, I think the more we could prolong the honeymoon period, the better. Absolutely, give Bitcoin every opportunity to work its way into the next, into the financial and even like energy infrastructure of the world.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a good strategy, and I think that fortunately there are probably some policymakers somewhere that even if they're not explicitly pursuing this tack with their governments, they're sort of they're doing it secretly. Like essentially, this is the concept of the fifth pillar, like a faction inside the government that works against the interests of the government. So they would, like a Federal Reserve employee has every incentive to tell the Fed not to worry about Bitcoin, and so just to prolong the period of time they can, purchase it themselves, or help themselves into the lifeboat, while telling the rest of the officers on the deck, everything's fine. Elites are probably not loyal to each other. I mean, they are and they aren't. But I think for a situation like this, there would be much less loyalty than you'd think, and they would easily step over one another to be on top for the next monetary paradigm.
Right.
Instead of trying to spend all their political capital to continue being at their middling station of the current one. So
yeah, and I like to think, and maybe this is wrong in some way, but the more that the more apparent that the problems with the existing system become, I'm hoping even the players in that system will be able to look at the existing system and something similar to what Bitcoin offers, and say maybe at first it's just an interest, and then it becomes they take a position, they learn more, they stay kind of quiet, but they're with everybody, whether you're in the system or not, actually, like the more that one system looks like it's not going to be around long term, the more you're interested in looking at other alternatives. And so hopefully that will continue its process of impressing upon people the importance of, one, having an alternative, and then once you think that's a viable alternative, then you're probably going to be motivated somewhat to use it as, at the very least, some kind of insurance policy.
Right. What I don't think will happen, or it wouldn't necessarily be beneficial if it happened, would be there to be an official discourse, an official conversation, policy debate on should we go into Bitcoin? I think that at that point, that the ship is effectively sailed.
Right. What's the most interesting, other than the stuff you're working on, what's the most interesting thing going on in the space in your mind these days?
Well, I mean, I would hope that more peer-to-peer applications get built beyond, building the backbone for them. I'm a big fan of BISC, which is a pure peer-to-peer application. I'm a fan of HODL HODL as well. It's slightly like semi-decentralized, like peer-to-peer exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. There needs to be more, dark liquidity for Bitcoin. So any project that advances that, I think, is extremely worthwhile. Let's see what else. I'm a fan of the privacy improvements that are coming to Bitcoin, to the extent that Lightning or Schnorr signatures will give us some added privacy affordances. I think that that's paramount for Bitcoiners to prioritize that. And then, well, I think that I don't know what will happen if Bitcoin succeeds. I don't even know how to prepare for it, but prepare for the, I guess, obliteration of right now nationalized monetary policy is sort of a binding force because it unites a nation in around a certain monetary economics, which permits a given fiscal strategy of a nation. So if you have a nation that's extremely fiscally oriented, like oriented around, I don't know, like social spending, they're going to be that type of situation would be very upset in a post-hyper Bitcoinized world where they have far less tax revenue. They have a great deal of trouble financing the same social social programs. So, nations like that, and that's really every nation to a varying degree. We need to be preparing or reminding ourselves of the social technologies that we used before we had the state to fill that in. So, on the bright side, this stuff is sort of was obvious to people throughout history. It's only relatively recently that the state has crowded out all of these, call them social welfare functions. We used to have eleemosynary hospitals, mutual aid societies, ways that the public would ensure, its more vulnerable members in ways that did not require, a grant from the government. So we should be re-examining, these cases from history on how a society can be functionally structured with far less top-down redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
Not that, and that's not even to say that I favor, wealth redistribution, but simply that, if a large percentage of the population has come to, expect it and it exists within that space, let's find and let's rediscover, the voluntarist, alternatives there.
Yeah.
Because I would oppose, the redistribution of wealth by force, but I still care for my common man, and I think that a truly free society, the importance of altruism it's much greater. So we're going to need to, dust off our understanding of private charity, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And for Bitcoin to really succeed, it is going to force us all to re-examine how we contribute to, society and the world at large, more so than just hodling, because as you say, the government is so involved in social welfare and many other areas today, and so many people are dependent on that infrastructure, and removing the means with which the government can support that infrastructure is going to mean there's a lot of uncomfortable untethering that's going to have to occur by the people who benefit from that. And and that's going to be just as far as adoption is concerned, that's going to be a force that we're going to have to confront, because the people who have vested interest, both from a government standpoint and the people that rely on those services that are provided, they're going to resist change because they know what change means. It's a less certain future. And so as part of our contribution to all this, it's not just the tech, it's not just the individual financial sovereignty, but we probably are going to have to give more and more consideration to how can we in other ways, begin contributing to an infrastructure that's going to allow for kind of more fertile social soil on which we can grow this new ecosystem, because it's much more than just let's all have our own financial sovereignty and everything will be okay,
Right, absolutely. Don't want to drop people on their head.
You seem like a bit of a history guy. In the period between 1870 and 1914, right? The so-called Belle Epoque, where the gold standard kind of was the main monetary standard around the world. What was the social the social involvement of the government during that period? Do you know?
Significantly less. I would say that the charity was, I think, as far as I've read, commonly facilitated by the church, and generally charitable societies. You can look up almsgiving houses in Europe. This is even before the Belle Epoque. So the Burgesses of Amsterdam, that type of thing. There were societal expectations that you would, give to these organizations, and it wasn't by force, but motivated out of goodness and care for your fellow man. And so my hope would be that Bitcoin, in fact, permits, if it does kick the state out of this business of care, it would be tremendous to replace the nanny state with a system where we truly see each other as humans, and that would be my great hope. But right now, if everyone's just about number go up, like hodl on, which is good and necessary, but there's, if everyone maintains the degree of selfishness that neoliberalism has inculcated in us, we'll end up in that cyberpunk, just the dystopic night city, where everyone's like of extreme violence and essentially social disintegration. Yeah. So I think that, and furthermore, I think the cultural memory on things prior to the state is like radically vanishing. Like people don't remember. Like my grandfather was like I guess the first generation to have like Social Security. So we're going to attempt to return to a way of being that is almost time out of mind.
Yeah.
And so that would be quite a feat. And so my hope is that we could do it. But there was, forget who said this, like at many points during the Middle Ages, the primary source of lead, for whatever they used lead to produce in the Middle Ages, or in just like, I guess, metal in general, was to scavenge it from Roman ruins. And so they had basically forgotten the very basic technology of, how do you produce, metal from ores. And so what I mean is that it's certainly not granted that we're going to be able to recall this. So it should be, I don't know, a conscious project.
Yeah. I'm hopeful. A lot is made of the ways in which being involved with Bitcoin stimulate behavior change. And thus far it's been mostly kind of like, I don't know, you take more responsibility, you have a lower time preference, you save more, you don't spend as much on frivolous things, that sort of thing. But, I'm hoping that continues to accelerate and evolve. And like you were just discussing, it's going to have to cause behavior change in that way if we're going to hope to untether ourselves, because, simultaneous to this movement, it does seem that in society, because I think one of the reasons it's going to be so hard is because we've relinquished so much, responsibility and obligation, and we've outsourced so many things to the state that for each individual to take back every single one of those responsibilities, or at least a lot of them, that's going to be a very uncomfortable process. And at the moment, the momentum seems to be in broader culture that people want to drive further into the state. I mean, you have a lot, around the world today, especially young people are saying they want to give more power, more responsibility. They want to rely on the state to fix more of the problems. They want the state to be in control of more of social systems and structures, and then divvy it up, quote unquote, fairly, because that's the most fair way to operate. And not only do I think that's incredibly juvenile and narrow-minded, but nevertheless, that is there's a huge movement toward that. I saw a headline yesterday where Bernie Sanders said billionaires shouldn't exist, and it's this type of thinking that a lot of people are engaging in these days, and I think it's possible to turn that around. What's that?
So what I'm hearing is you're not Yang Gang?
No, I'm not Yang Gang. He seems like a nice guy, we'd probably have a nice chat around the dinner table or something like that, but I don't believe giving money to people is going to fix everything.
On the other hand, he is obviously a Bitcoin accelerationist. He's just trying to devalue the dollar so we can move on to the Bitcoin.
Right, that's his real agenda.
Right, exactly. So but you got to support, if only for that reason.
I got to say, out of the candidates, and I'm probably just saying this because not only do I think she's really well spoken, but she's kind of hot too. But I like Tulsi. She seems to have a good head on her shoulders. Not that I engage in any of it, but just from what I've heard.
Yeah, I have to say, apart from the prospect of printing $2.5 trillion a year for UBI, I have not been too aware of any of the Democratic policy proposals.
Oh man!
Also, I would like to see the Beto AR-15 confiscation, because that would I think hilarious. But not enough said on that one, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
well, man, another sign of the times. I mean, again, I only see it in passing, like the Democratic stuff, but so much of it is so cringe. Whether it's Bernie or Yang or Beto or Biden, who seems to be pretty much incomprehend, doesn't seem to be able to string together a sentence at this point. Yeah. It's all just it seems like such a train wreck. Say what you will about Trump, but I don't think he's going to have a hard time getting a second term.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that way. Of course, if whoever is the president in the second term is probably going to have a nasty recession on their hands.
It seems like it. Yeah.
That nobody's really vocalizing
that. All right, man. I'm going to get into the rapid fire stuff. Did you want to discuss anything else before we get into that?
No, just think about what computer you're using, and when we get onto these announcements about your new computer, pay attention.
All right,
and just try one out.
And so, any timeline for when that might be?
It'll be, well, I mean, they're available now, but you can if your followers message you, I'll give you one, or I'll give them one.
Okay.
I'll give you a bunch.
Sweet. And one last thing, man, because you're kind of. You there?
Hey, you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you some software to distribute.
Awesome. Regarding your kind of anonymity, right? Like, you seem to be in this space where, obviously you're not anonymous. Your face is one of the most popular means in the space, but you seem to keep a relatively low profile. So what's the motivation there? Because if anybody wanted to know who you were, they could probably figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I like reading Twitter. I don't like participating in the rat race of being a thinkfluencer. So I'll dodge that where I can. Podcasts are the one thing that I've really, I guess, indulged in, and I think that's probably the place that's at least the place where, based on my Bitcoin content consumption, that's where I think the greatest signal is anyway. So,
right.
Definitely not Twitter.
Noted. All right, man. Let's do the rapid fire now. You good to go?
Let's go for it.
All right. As long or short as you want. So the first one is, what is money?
Oh man, our internet is killing us. Should we disable video or something? That might make it a little faster.
Yeah. Okay. Give it a whirl.
unless you want to do it like unless you want to publish the video, and it would be odd to just have video for the for part and not the other.
Yeah, let's keep going, and if it keeps being a problem, we'll just change it over.
Okay, sure.
Um,
All right, yes.
what is money?
So here we go. All right. What is money? Uh, Money is a type of currency that I think is optimized for use as exchange media. But its primary characteristic is medium of exchange. And when I say optimal, I mean it's a decent store of value, and then it's also decently easy to price things in it as a unit of account. But the primary characteristic there is an exchange media.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or somebody over 80, what would you say, or what do you say?
Well, I did get my grandfather to buy Bitcoin.
Nice.
So I would say, or what I told him was, Gramps, it's digital gold. It's like a return to the gold standard, and he's old enough to remember those days. So that's actually an easy one.
Interesting. And
if you have an 80-year-old grandparent, they remember the gold standard.
And did he kind of accept that something in the digital realm could have similar characteristics to gold?
Yeah. I explained to him how the scarcity characteristics of Bitcoin. I explained, stock to flow to him, and he understood that. And I explained how, it really is a synthetic. Well, that's George Seldrin's term, synthetic commodity money. That basically it's a proxy for Bitcoin is a currency that's a proxy for energy, which is call it nature's currency.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think it was actually quite easy to explain.
That's awesome. It's funny that even people like probably our parents' age, or maybe I heard you say yours is in finance, so maybe a bit different, but so many people in that generation, the coming off the gold standard or convertibility was like a non-event. Most people don't even know that happened. It's a weird historical thing.
Well, it was this. They were weaned off, right? There was a period like the Bretton Woods system. It was they slowly dialed down the amount of gold in the dollar until eventually it was just for show.
Yeah.
So they popped it off.
I knew this local media tycoon when I was a kid. Super interesting guy. He owned a TV, radio, newspaper, magazine sort of conglomerate, and big weirdo, right? Like into UFOs and like going to the Amazon to find like the elongated skulls, like and for me as like a 10-year-old, blew my mind every time I got to talk to him or hear him speak. And he, on his late night TV show at like 2 a.m., he'd bring in like, some Swami guru from India and just like talk with him for 5 hours, probably, had a big influence on me, to be honest. But one of the things was he was known for was when that in 1971, he sold a bunch of his radio assets and bought up a bunch of gold because he thought that this was a crazy move to completely untether the currency from any sort of actual backing, and it ended up being a very, very dandy investment for him. And
yeah, excellent trade.
Yeah. So what is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Dear. Well, if you have a historical imagination, you realize perhaps the nation state is, a temporary, or not a temporary. It hasn't always existed, right? At least in its modern form. So, monetary privilege being the greatest thing that props up the nation state, kicking out that support sort of leads you to a more historically ripe time. So I think that's my greatest hope about Bitcoin is, things might change radically and hopefully for the better.
What do you think happens to the nation state if governments lose their control over the monetary system?
Well, it it depends on I guess how much Bitcoin they buy, right? But if it was a state that had no Bitcoin, I could see a sort of the patchwork model emerging where states need to be radically smaller, uh, probably stabilizing in size around that of a city-state. So, country like the size of Singapore or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably many more polities. The cost to just move around the world is also so much lower today. So, I think that there's the likelihood that you'll be able to shop polities according to your political preferences to a much greater degree, and so that's benefited when you have more polities to choose from. Right. Originally, that was the conception of the United States, which was that you'd be able to move state to state according to which one fit your political preferences best, but never really transpired with the ascendancy of the federal government, and especially stuff like the Civil War, which just means you can never leave. And then Shays' Rebellion, that was another thing. Washington put down Shays' Rebellion and basically denied from almost the outset that there would be a real political a real market for political systems.
Yeah, I think it's possible. We're just starting to see the that sort of scenario emerge in the jurisdictions that are being more friendly towards crypto and Bitcoin in terms of taxation or things like that. Singapore, Malta, I think Portugal recently. Like, they're just starting to maybe realize that changing regulations in that way might actually be a benefit in attracting people with money.
Right. Yeah. And Estonian e-residency is a program now. But yeah, shout out to Balaji, by the way. He brought up Shays' Rebellion the other day on what Bitcoin did and inspired me to look more into that. But yeah. Good podcast, a good recent podcast if anyone hasn't heard it.
I'm not too familiar with that. I'll have to check it out. What does the sovereign individual mean to you?
Sovereign individual? Well, I think sovereignty is it's taking a line of flight from one form, which was this very nation-bound sovereignty, and now it's virtual-bound sovereignty, where if you no longer have sovereignty if a cretin controls what code you run on your machine, right? Your private key, your code. These are virtual things, but these are now represent very, very well. I'm reticent to use the word real because that would be an oxymoron, but they represent very credible threats or opportunities for your sovereignty in the world.
How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it, and if you're comfortable saying so, accumulating it?
It's funny. Someone said this the other day that that question is just a proxy.
I know. I saw that.
How old you are. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I had the displeasure of meeting with a high school classmate the other month, and they told me that I told them about Bitcoin in 2012, but my record of events shows me getting interested in Bitcoin first in 2016. So I'm unfortunate. I'm dismayed to report that I had a period of 4 years amnesia And so it's a very large regret, and perhaps yeah, that's how long it took me to get into Bitcoin.
Yeah. Did they take your advice in 2012, and were they coming at you from the window of a
No,
Lambo?
I that would have been that would have been even more
Even
ironic.
worse.
That would have been even worse. Yeah.
What has been your most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin in conversation or more formally?
Oh man. I mean, I'll say I just always show Bitcoin to Uber drivers, just so I like practically not everyone, but every other one, just to refine my pitch. But sadly, I have to say, education is it's the biggest bottleneck. Well, it is the biggest bottleneck for Bitcoin adoption, right? It's just hard to get an understanding of Bitcoin into everyone's minds. It takes at least 10 hours, and that's modest. Like 10 hours of, if you were just had them in a classroom setting, it would take 10 hours to just drill all the aspects of Bitcoin into their head, right? But libertarians, if I would call myself a libertarian, you know, they're never, education is never their strong suit. It's like, oh, if you would just realize, how that taxation is theft. If you look at this axiomatic proof of it, nobody has time to be educated on, like a monetary system today. So the way that people learn about, the way that we get past the Bitcoin bottleneck is, right now we're in a period where we can appeal to greed. So, buy it because number will go up in the future. But then, the real strategy of Bitcoin is that it's post-political. It's beyond the political process. It doesn't need to be debated. We don't need to win hearts and minds at all. In fact, it is, pure thermodynamics. It is real politics. If there are miners there to keep the blockchain growing, Bitcoin is not. It doesn't have to sell itself to anyone through education. It enforces itself literally by force. And then in the far future, people just use Bitcoin. They don't even consider once how it works. It's just like most people don't consider, oh, what's the SWIFT system? How did my dollar get from here to my friend's bank, from like my bank account to my friend's bank account?
Yeah.
I wish I could speak more enthusiastically about evangelism, because ironically, people would probably consider me like a large Bitcoin evangelist, and in some cases, I am, but it's really just the people that are interested in Bitcoin that like find Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, in terms of bringing it back to like what's a concrete way to teach, like if you are an interested Bitcoiner, just make content, make do a podcast or a newsletter, do content for people that are already self-interested in it, because if you just go to the average person on the street and shake them and say, oh, like, you say like, look, magic internet money, you've got to get on board, they're probably going to roll their eyes and walk away. So, help build Bitcoin's cache of resources for someone who's already sort of found it on their own, if that makes sense. Because that's the influx of people into Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing too, right? Because now so many people are like wondering what this thing is, so that there's a lot of people like podcasts, people that write articles that are commenting on that. But there's probably way fewer podcasts and articles now that just discuss what the internet is, So this is just a moment in time where people are asking these questions, and I'm sure it will morph and change as we go along, where, people will stop asking what this is because it'll just be operating so
Yes.
frictionlessly in the background, and it'll change, the nature of what the education should be, if any. It might just, work and people get it. And
Right. Exactly. It will be beyond, the point of education. Yeah. That's entirely correct, I think.
the thing I stress is just that I think it's bad to like get up in people's grill and like, come off like a crazy person and say they need to get into this, but I think everybody should be comfortable showing their enthusiasm. Like, it's okay to be enthusiastic about something, and I think the more people that are doing that, people take notice of enthusiasm.
Absolutely. I mean, that's like the enthusiasm that I have when I tell an Uber driver about it.
Right.
All I mean is that, like, that is not the frontier of Bitcoin's of make or breaking Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Of making or breaking Bitcoin.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion? And an add-on is, what's your favorite movie clip or rant of all time?
My favorite movie clip or rant. Let's see. Well, this isn't like my favorite or anything, but there was a Nick Land recently went on a podcast with Maggie Siebert of Twitter, and recommended this movie, In the Mouth of Madness, which is a Lovecraftian or an adaptation of a Lovecraft story. And so, if you're unfamiliar with H.P. Lovecraft, he was a writer from the 20th century. And his genre is known as cosmic horror or abstract horror. And so what that means is, there were usually these extremely fanciful monsters that were, so grotesque and horrific that usually they would be, concealed from the reader's or viewer's point of view, right? But they come from beyond. And so there's a scene that Nick talks about where, there's this town and there's this church where the protagonist sort of naively goes into this church following his investigation, and suddenly these dark forces start compressing the church, on all sides, and the doors are bulging and tentacles are, whipping, like trying to get from the outside to the inside. And essentially, this is the metaphor for, how Bitcoin explodes upon to the earth. It's like it comes from the outside, and it exists outside the official conversation, official narratives of policy, of academic research, and it's just like my sign. Bitcoin is not meant to be in the room, right? It literally flies over the shoulders of the central bankers, like that. And it suddenly just bursts upon the scene. It doesn't actually. It was never like this considered. Well, should we transition to a cryptocurrency type system? Should we use Bitcoin? Like, this conversation was not being had, but Bitcoin happened to the world. So just, I guess, remember this when you're thinking about your praxis as it relates to Bitcoin. You're sort of riding this faceless force, and you're basically stampeding into the established worldview, the settled political systems and economics of monetary, like what money should be. And so use this to your advantage wherever possible. And right now, this is just like Bitcoin is so far beyond the grasp of these people. They're so they try to bring the outside into the inside, and make Bitcoin part of this like quaint part of their worldview. And this is best exemplified by the articles. Oh yeah, Bitcoin will obviously die because of this. Like, Bitcoin will obviously die because it will be killed by government. Government will ban it. Well, it's been probably 8 years, and since the first one of those articles was written, and there's probably been at least 1,000 of them, and they're all wrong for the same reason, which is they tried to incorporate massage Bitcoin into their current worldview, when fundamentally what Bitcoin represents is an expansion of the realm of the possible.
Nice. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
So yeah, I would just refer back to what I was talking about earlier about the black market. The black market fee spend should be greater than the central banks, or the foregone tax revenue, otherwise considered to be the government's propensity to kill it. So they could just spend a lot of money on mining hardware. Of course, you get into higher level game theoretics about well, would they?
Right.
Would they not? Once they had undergone this investment, would it not change their mental equation for what they should do? But I mean, it's a very basic way to just kill Bitcoin, right? Just continuously stymie the production of blocks according to the consensus rules.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't think Bitcoin dies another way. So
it is interesting that I'm looking forward to digging more into that argument, because perhaps it's not just as simple as like, well, does the government take in more in taxes than it would cost to inhibit or interrupt the system in some way, Bitcoin in some way, because maybe the government can only afford to take 10% of tax revenue. And if they take any more than that, then they find other systems and structures in which, they have to support fall apart as well, right? So it's not just like the total amount of tax revenue versus the total amount of, fees or money that miners generate, or whatever the metric on the Bitcoin side is. It's like, maybe there's limiting factors on how much as a percentage of the government's revenue they would be able to devote to such an enterprise. And if they cross a certain amount, then maybe they find, they've shot themselves in the foot in another area,
Right. I guess what we mean is that we need to look at the state as though and this is all Eric Voss, look at the state as though they are rational, because, the deep state is real. And governments are probably smarter than they seem. So they would be looking at this.
For sure. What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin?
Most recent aha. I mean, the sort of the understanding that, just every time I say look into the technical aspects of Bitcoin, it's like, oh, it makes sense that Bitcoin, you justify all of the conservatism that went into Bitcoin's design, and it makes sense. So Lightning, for example, I would say would be a good aha moment. It's like, yeah, this is the correct way to structure the way that Bitcoin works. And so I would say that aha moment was like through Segwit, like naively entering Bitcoin economics. You think like, oh, just like make the blocks bigger, right? Whatever. But I don't know. Finding out stuff like that, it usually makes sense. The core devs seem, by all indications, are extremely thoughtful, and you can always have aha moments listening to them.
What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society? We touched on this a little bit in the previous section.
Yeah, so just the absolute deterritorialization it brings to everything it touches, that it obliterates like the monetary priority prerogative of nations. And so that, to the extent that that is put toward, binding forces on nations, like, uniting them under one social system, if that evaporates, where does the nation re-territorialize? What becomes the cultural and political production of a Bitcoinized world?
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to the reserves, and will they exist in 20 years?
Probably already happened. Well, and if a central bank will exist in 20 years, yeah, it would be a function of that. Like, did they buy Bitcoin? Did they hyperinflate their currency? But central banks exist for the betterment, but like for the survival of the state. So to say they're only about, I think, 6 or 7 or 8 nations in the world don't have central banks. The largest one being Monaco, and so Monaco doesn't have a central bank now because they're not really interested in collecting tax revenue, because it's like the whole country is basically just a casino. So it seems like every nation that has a central bank is interested in financing itself that way. So will nations figure out an alternative way to finance themselves? Who knows? Will they be able to tax Bitcoin? Will there be a nation in 20 years? It's sort of intractable question there.
Biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
The 4 years of amnesia.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
Well, I think Satoshi was pretty sly. I think that there's a chance maybe he was mining other coins. This would probably come through in some chain analysis, but I'd be willing to bet that Satoshi, after the final block that we consider to contain coins mined by Satoshi, I bet that he purchased a bunch from another person, because obviously he would. If he, like, most of all, believed in this system. Mm-hmm. I do think it's sort of romantic that we have this knife dangling by a thread over our heads, that at any point, if Craig were Satoshi and he just market sold all the coins, it would blast the market to bits instantly. I think that would be hilarious, and I think it's funny that we have that sort of destructive possibility lurking. But I'm pretty confident that they're probably not going to move. But I think it's nice that we haven't confiscated them from Satoshi. That would be, I think, supremely ungrateful.
Definitely. What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about or interacting with Bitcoin?
Just technological humility, I would say. I wasn't even the biggest science fiction buff growing up, but everyone has their very self-assured worldview on like, oh, this is how technology works. This is where it's all going. And when you just realize when you realize how many domains Bitcoin draws upon, cryptography, distributed systems, economics, monetary economics, whatever. It goes so far, and you realize you'll never be able to corner the knowledge about it all. It just sort of reminds you of the singularity, the catalactic singularity that Bitcoin happens because so many people in different parts of the world had specialized knowledge about certain things, and it would be beyond the depth of one person to synthesize it all. So I guess be humble, but don't let it deter you, obviously, from being an agent.
Right. Now, I think I may change or remove this question in the future, but because it's, will you ever sell the bulk of your Bitcoin, assuming you have any at all? I know there's been a lot of boating accidents recently.
Well, I'll say I have some Bitcoin with that. I would absolutely sell. Like I know people like Matt Odell would never sell, right? Because he'd be like, oh, Bitcoin's going to pump forever. I'm never selling, whatever. But, I think that there's a very obvious equation to indicate like when you should sell at least, I don't know, or when you should rebalance. It's not whether you should sell a certain percentage of your Bitcoin. It's when you should order Bitcoin as a certain percentage of your total net worth.
Right.
And so maybe I would leave, a third of my net worth is Bitcoin, but, I would say fair value for Bitcoin is equal. Like Matt Majinkis of Crypto Voices gave a good talk on this at Baltic Honey Badger. When Bitcoin is equal in like real terms to the amount of base money there is, say, today, like the moment pre-Bitcoin, divide that number by however many saleable coins you think there are, maybe like 18 million, and then maybe perhaps discount that further by, if you think there would be a Pareto distribution that for like other currencies in the world, so like the 80-20 rule and trails off. So maybe Bitcoin would be only like 80% of the world's money. Who knows? So that gives you a pretty concrete price at when you should sell. When you think that Bitcoin has reached its long-term stable value, and then it just it is money, then absolutely you should invest in more productive assets. Bitcoin doesn't really produce anything. It's just meant to be a medium of exchange primarily. Like it stores value well now, and you can speculate on it, but ultimately, I'd rather probably have a company that has cash flow than just like a Bitcoin that's sitting there.
Right. Have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
Well, I must admit, I won't lie. I did once buy a shitcoin, but then I soon after sold it. I bought it for the reason that I thought that the Pareto distribution would be the case, and in some cases I still do believe that there will be a Pareto distribution, but in the meantime Bitcoin is the most obvious investment case. So don't try to bet. The bet that I would not make now is like betting on what is the number 2 currency in the world, like dollar, gold, probably not Ethereum, but you know what I mean. Like there will probably be, even post hyper Bitcoinization, there will probably be another currency in the world, but it wouldn't really be as good of an investment as Bitcoin.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion, if none on Bitcoin? Any subject is okay.
Uh, I guess I have a few. One is what I was just saying, which is that, and not to go back to the Eric Voskuil well here, he talked about how at some point the the cost of a Bitcoin transaction will probably exceed the prioritization for someone on the security of their Bitcoin transaction. So there will be transactions for which Bitcoin security is simply too expensive, or you could put it in other terms, it would be a luxury. If you are still in the developing world in 20 years, because there will still be some areas of the world that are impoverished in 20 years, and Bitcoin will be expensive, may be expensive to transact, even if you bundle hundreds of thousands of transactions into, say, a single Lightning channel, open and close. There's still a fee rate where Bitcoin's security is more expensive than it's actually worth to you, to like knowing that you had the strongest final settlement guarantees. So that will be the number two of the Pareto distribution. Like, I think people will use that currency. Another controversial, like, I think you could say we wouldn't need Bitcoin if everyone bought a stack of paper bags. And what I mean by that is there's this thing called the bagging rule, where in days gone by, now banks break into your security deposit boxes, but basically you used to be able to give your money over to a bank in a bag, or a chest, and preferably like a sealed bag or a locked chest, and they would not be able to legally open it up and lend on a fractional reserve basis what you would give them in the bag. They were basically just a physical custodian of your money. And so what I mean by this is that if we had a more sound banking system, we probably wouldn't need Bitcoin. Saifedean talked about this the other day. It's like, oh yeah, the way you kill Bitcoin is just reform the way the banking system works, right? You make it so that you don't need to transition to Bitcoin, because if you took away that aspect of it, would everyone be clamoring to get into Bitcoin? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, I've heard him make that argument, and I get what he's saying, but I also think unless the solution proposed by the government is Bitcoin, then I still think there's going to be a lot of people that want the solution that is Bitcoin. Because, yeah, I mean, look, even with the gold standard, right? It checks and balances on the amount of money that could be created and deployed and all that kind of stuff. But you still have third-party liability issues. You still have the fact that the government still, hold all the gold and get to administer the policy around it. I mean, and maybe maybe it would have been a less urgent problem that needs to be solved. But I still think when the technology became available, people like your Satoshis of the world would have been like, this can be better, and we should make it better, and we should want it to be better.
Sure. Well, I guess the question is, could a gold-backed world be? Could we reform into that, or would the reduction in incentive, if we had true monetary reform, it could still leave us over the critical point for achieving, that critical mass of people to be in favor of Bitcoin, that they would, go through the whole rigmarole of bootstrapping Bitcoin, even just for, a marginal improvement in monetary policy. So it's not that I think that Bitcoin is at risk of being killed that way, but I think that, you could envision a world where maybe if the current monetary system were better, the incentive to transition into Bitcoin wouldn't be so great.
Yeah.
And then my last controversial opinion is that, Bitcoin isn't, and this goes to, my current project with the operating system. Bitcoin is not a panacea. If we need a complementary computer to go with our digital money. So if we can't move past the cloud web, we will be, I don't know, at risk for backsliding on many of the gains of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It also will be at risk of the government being able to confiscate large swaths of Bitcoin. I mean, I would urge your listeners to go look up, civil asset forfeiture, that type of thing. There's been more. The popular, the fun stat to cite is that there's been more dollars confiscated through civil asset forfeiture in the last 5 years than something like the amount of than the dollar value of all things that have been stolen. So,
and what's the definition of civil asset forfeiture?
Civil asset forfeiture, and this is off the top of my head, so please don't maybe post a link or look it up afterwards. But it's basically that if the government believes that any asset has been involved in the commission of a crime, they can seize that asset. And what this turns into, in effect, is that there's an extremely broad definition for what is involved in a crime. So a drug dealer gets nailed for drugs, and the government takes their parents' house because they lived there once. It's that type of thing, where the government can basically take whatever they want. Not to sound like such a blue in the face libertarian, but it is a situation that if applied to let's just talk about America, the American domiciled repositories of Bitcoin, like American exchanges, Coinbase, Cash App, even the collaborative custody people like Casa, Unchained Capital, whatever. All these places could be leaned on by the government in so many different ways.
Yeah.
So people really need to, and this I shouldn't have mentioned Casa and Unchained Capital because they're not pure cloud web, and they're like multi-signature. So I guess that invalidates that. But if we all have our money on Coinbase, like I said, it's only a couple rules that the government needs to pass to prevent people from pulling their coins out, and so that I would say would be a disaster. The government would get that Bitcoin. They could use it to Bitcoiners' disadvantage, or it otherwise empowers an enemy. So if we don't and this gets back to, if we're still using the cloud web, if we're still on their plantation, if you're still a digital serf, Bitcoin will give you some nice gains on paper, but it's not your money. So, beware. And for the people that are building out there, be motivated to make the user experience for peer-to-peer computing applications better, so that people aren't faced with, the sort of the sorry mental calculus of like, oh, well, it's so much easier to just let Coinbase hold on to it,
Yeah, for sure. Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years?
I'd say that's a crapshoot. I guess it depends on, with the incoming recession, what will the story on Bitcoin be? Is it risk on? Is it risk off? We have this a growing, stable of well-seasoned macro investors, global macro investors that see it as a recession hedge. So that could be important. But I think I could see it being over $1 million in 5 years, but I could also see it not gaining that reputation as a risk off asset, and still being in the same place or lower. So there's a lot coming in the next years.
Yeah, between sub 10 and $1 million, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I would say the government will absolutely be furiously desperate, because interest rates are already pretty much as low as they can go before negative, and they have not unwound their massive balance sheet. It's like they're not starting from a clean slate on both of their policy levers. So some Bitcoiners see this and say, okay, yeah, well, that's jet fuel, obviously, for Bitcoin. Rocket fuel. It's the most bullish set of statistics. But also think of the government as a cornered beast. They now almost have nothing to lose. They're out of ammunition, and so their response could be just to, go berserk and do something truly beyond the pale. So, not sure.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
I shower with Dr. Bronner's stuff is great.
How do you define success?
On peppermint, and now I do eucalyptus.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and I also completed the full rainbow of. I got all the flavors now.
Do you use the shower gel or the bar?
I use it's just the liquid, hemp Castile soap.
In the bottle.
In the bottle, yeah. I use it for shampoo. I use it to shave. I use it for everything. It's great.
Do you ever pick up the bottle while you're in the shower and just reread all the tiny script that's on there?
Yeah, that shit is great, man. I love that. It feels human, like it's not put out by some megacorp.
Yeah, I used to have to go to Hong Kong. Not go to Hong Kong for it, but I used to, when in Hong Kong, living in Shanghai, I'd go to Hong Kong, pick up 3-4 bottles of that stuff and bring it back with me.
It's classic.
Yeah. How do you define success?
I don't know, in the Christian terms, I suppose. To live and love God, and to probably have to be in accordance with conceptions of Christian virtue, I suppose. I guess a recent sermon that I heard at church was to be what's the word? Oh yeah, they were talking about the definition of affluence, right? And affluent, the root of it is flow, like the Greek word for flow, affluare or something like that. It basically means to let blessings flow through you, and not to be the end repository for them, and that you're much happier if you can pass things on. So
That's
just
nice.
remember, you can't take your Bitcoin with you to the grave. So do good things with it now while you can.
I like that. Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
I mean, the podcasts are great. I mean, so many good repositories, but more so I've been looking toward, like, once you understand Bitcoin, like the podcasts offer you less, right? Because you sort of
You get it.
you get like, okay, yeah, rah Bitcoin, I love it, and I still listen to all those podcasts just to jazz myself up, like for the hit of dopamine. Like nothing gets me fired up like a rabbit hole recap with Marty and Matt, or Noted, or like Pomp. Like all those podcasts are great. Crypto Voices, they're all Stefan Livera. They're all excellent. What Bitcoin did. The shout outs could go on forever, so I'll stop there.
All right.
But I would say that you'll understand that dimension of Bitcoin with you can fully saturate on that. So I think you should look beyond to, I don't know, some type of philosophy. Like you choose what you think is important. You pick where Bitcoin fits into your praxis and read that philosophy. Like I think Bitcoin and money is like our world is modernity itself is sort of overcome with an overabundance of images. We're just drowning in text and images from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. And so I don't know, understand Bitcoin in the terms of images, in the terms of semiotics. You could read theory on that. You could read I don't know, Austrian econ. You could read like just literary theory, whatever you want. I'm just like relate Bitcoin to something beyond Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is it won't be an end. It has to be a means.
Right.
So find something else to do with Bitcoin, that you can use Bitcoin to transact in the world. Don't think of getting like hitting the moon and retiring to the beach should be the end. Like for many it would be, but no. You can do even more. Like there's like Bitcoin is the realization that there's a horizon of possibility. It's not that Bitcoin tells you that the horizon is not closed, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you don't live inside a zoo, that you are indeed in the wild, and there is, I don't know, a frontier that can yet be pursued.
Nice. Last two. What is the one most important action that someone can take today to up their game in an area that you think is important or of your expertise?
Hey, sorry, I think you cut out there, but was the question, what action can someone take?
Yeah, to up their game in a way that you think is important or in your area of expertise.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, just generally, just build something. Don't be a passive consumer. Like, yes, you can be a passive consumer and change, you can change your life just on the consumptive end. Like, now I save more. Now I, stack sats. And I like reordered. I got my life in order, but like beyond that, like change your life. I don't know, more radically. Build something that perhaps uses Bitcoin, and you'll find that it enhances your appreciation for just like the richness of the Bitcoin opportunity. Like there's so many smart people that are in this space that, I don't know, are available, and it's, I would say, been truly joyful to try building companies and getting to know some of these people, working on a concrete project together.
Yeah. So get involved.
Yeah.
What is one question you'd like to see added to this list, if any?
Or have you read Moby Dick?
Okay, good. All right. So this is the last part. This is the word association. So I'll say a word. You tell me the first thing that pops into your head, and that's it. So first one is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Sly, but also sly, but possibly Uh, beneficent.
Government.
It exists.
Hash rate.
Uh, nature's currency.
The individual.
A project.
Security.
Gun.
Ego.
Death.
Greed.
Tool.
Stack and sats.
Matt Odell.
Fiat currency.
Money with no use value.
Guns.
A type of security.
Memes.
Language.
Altcoins.
Fiat money.
Pizza.
The hardest part about being keto.
Agree with you there. Socialism.
Nice idea. If nice idea under alternative circumstances.
Family.
Priority.
Trump.
Indicator.
Future.
Neo-China arrival.
Libra.
A wink.
Gold.
Commodity money.
And Bitcoin.
Synthetic commodity money.
Awesome. Well, look, man, I think we went a little bit over the allotted time, so I appreciate you sticking with it and having this conversation with me. Is there any, where you want to direct people for any of your projects, or do you want to just keep it totally anon for the moment?
No, if you want to find me on Twitter, you can probably find me on Twitter. If you desperately need to get in touch and you can't find me on Twitter, get in touch through your gracious host, and hopefully he'll pass along your message.
And should we be expecting any further memes in the future, or have you hung up your cape?
Oh yeah.
Or have you hung up the notepad and we won't be seeing any more from you?
No, there will definitely be more hilarious projects. I can guarantee it, but maybe not photo bombs.
Right.
We'll let that one stand.
Well, we'll all anxiously await whatever that is in the future. But man, thanks again. I really appreciate it. I know it's late there, so I'll let you get back home and get some rest. But keep doing what you're doing. Look forward to seeing the fruition of some of the projects you're working on in the future, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk again face to face sometime.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, brother. Take care.
Adios.